at having a normal job. Normal life, normal hours. The taxi drivers of Australia have the perception of my tribe. They'd be amazed to learn that an MSO player is tenured for life, belongs to an almost militant union, and has an ironclad enterprise bargain agreement based on the heady days of the old and safe public service. This is true. I've got one of the safest jobs in the country. And you imagine me sitting at home all day in my Regent North Fitzroy house, surrounded by red velvet cushions, drinking absinthe, having poetry readings with my Bohemian friends. I used to do that, but I've got a kid now. So today we're talking about failure as a pathway to success, which is something that I've definitely had to deal with on my journey and something that I've had to guide my students through in my role as a teacher for the past 20 years. The first point to make about this is that it's partly to do with how we perceive the concepts of failure and success, or rather how we construct a subjective judgment of failure. Take this example of just last week in Melbourne Symphony Orchestra. I don't know if anybody was at the concert. We had the delightful husband and wife team of Raphael Wolfish on the solo cello and Libby Wolfish leading from the first violin chair. The audience absolutely loved the concert on Thursday night and called for an encore. The orchestra had one of the best weeks for ages. Everyone was smiling and laughing and saying, "Oh, isn't she heaven? Aren't they wonderful? Isn't this great music making?" And then we got a complete shellacking in the Age newspaper, which you may also have read in the review. Thanks, Clive. Now, the question about that is, was the concert a failure? Now, the answer is no if you were one of the 1,000 people in the audience at the recital centre, or one of the 30 experienced professionals on the stage. But the answer is yes if you're one of the many thousands who read the review and you weren't even there. Yes, the concert was a failure. So it's perspective, really. It's important to understand that failure and success cannot be thought of as absolutes. It's so much to do with perception, and never more the case than in my world, in the hierarchical food chain of classical musicianship. So I'm going to tell you a bit about the hierarchy of my little world. In terms of status, you start with conductor, like / God, big G God, soloist, orchestral musician, music teacher, and amateur, let's say. I mean, you would probably have those perceptions as well. Now, starting from the bottom, the music teacher usually thinks of the amateur as a failure because the music teacher learned how to play all their scales in tune, and the amateur doesn't practice because they're probably your thoracic surgeon, and therefore doesn't ever have a hope of achieving that level. But hang on, because the amateur enjoys every single note of music that they play, whereas the music teacher is overworked, underpaid, and is considering a law degree because they're starting to hate music. So therefore, who is the more successful musician? Now, looking further, the orchestral musician, me, looks at the music teacher and thinks, well, you're a failure because you didn't get a job in a symphony orchestra and you have to teach for a living. But the music teacher looks at the orchestral musician and thinks, well, you've benefited from a lifetime of music education, you've gained so much, but you give nothing back. I'm the one training the next generation. So who's more successful there? Then the soloist swans in. And they do swan, I can tell you. Sarah Chang swans in heels like this and stamps her feet when she plays. And they're a real breed of creature, I tell you. And they look at all of us public servants in the second violins and think to themselves, well, they didn't practice hard enough. They've obviously failed where I've succeeded. But I look at them and think to myself, well, that must be one of the most lonely existences for any musician. I mean, really just spending hours in the practice room, travelling from hotel room to hotel room. Obviously, to be driven to be a full-time soloist, you have to be a sociopathic narcissist. Have you even ever played a string quartet? And finally, the conductor looks at all of us and thinks to himself, / herself, but usually himself, well, you're all failures because I'm in charge of the lot of you. Anyway, now I'm going to take you on a short journey through 3 of these perspectives. Firstly, my own perspective as a teacher. Secondly, my own perspective as a professional musician. And thirdly, through my father's perspective as a conductor. And I'll demonstrate that if we stop and imagine that there is actually no such thing as failure, then we can move forward, having obliterated the perceived obstacles in our path, because there's no such thing as failure, only experience. Wow. Firstly, me as a teacher. I've, believe it or not, been teaching violin, viola, chamber music and orchestral string playing for 20 years. at the University of Melbourne, the Victorian College of the Arts, Monash University, the Australian National Academy of Music, and the Australian Youth Orchestra, where I'm also on the Artistic Committee and have been a member of the Board of Directors for 4 years. Now, by the time musicians reach tertiary level, they're well versed in failure. That's that failure. Having done the Stedfords, having gone through the AMEB examination system, and having auditioned for various state and national youth orchestra programs. Not one of these people would have passed every one of these tests, or even more than maybe half of these tests. If you choose to play an instrument, then you're going to be judged not only on fixed parameters of assessment, like intonation, rhythm, and correct notes, so measurable parameters, but also on more subjective matters of style and interpretation. Thank you, Clive O'Connell in The Age. It's clear that if you've decided to be a musician, then you've created a situation for yourself where it's incredibly difficult to succeed in the traditional sense. The Japanese Olympic gold figure skating medalist in 2006, Shizuka Arakawa, fell on her backside more than 20,000 times on the way to that medal. That's really inspiring for us to remember that kind of thing. Imagine that girl, that beautiful little girl, thumping down on her backside 20,000 times. It's kind of encouraging. Music students, like all musicians, are motivated way beyond any minor setbacks, because for us, music is a hunger and a passion and an obsession. Motivation is rarely the issue. It's not so much of a challenge for me to keep my students focused and motivated, but more to get them to take the feedback from the experience and use it as a tool for refinement and progression. My main aim as a teacher is to furnish students with the tools for self-awareness and self-analysis so that they can take responsibility for their own development. And believe it or not, the biggest challenge for me as a teacher is to get my students to become more objective and remove all emotion from the process of learning. This is met with amazing resistance at first, because they all think that they're great artists and that music making is about expressing emotion and little else, whereas involving one's emotion can often cloud the issue. I think this translates to almost any field, any discipline, martial arts, etc. Emotion is closely tied to ego, and by removing emotion and ego altogether, which, let's face it, if you're a human, you really can't, but you can strive towards it, then the setbacks are no longer taken personally. And they stop thinking about failure and success and just see the task at hand and get on with it. The end result is that the successful musician's commitment to their chosen field will always be strong enough to just plough through the setbacks. After a while, we all start to see these setbacks in a much more positive light, not as setbacks, but as bricks of knowledge and experience that build a house of deeper understanding, a temple of worship, through which we can better understand ourselves, our art, and our field. Secondly, me as a professional musician. Okay, here we go. Siobhan, have I got enough time to take these people through my failures? Oh, sorry, formative experiences. Do we have till tomorrow morning? Anyway, I'll just give you a few highlights of my challenges and obstacles. My father forced me to start playing the violin when I was 5. This lasted for one lesson. I'm not sure why anyone ever plays the violin, because it sounds disgusting, for about 15 years. Doesn't it, Colin? Yes. So I learnt piano and flute instead. But when I was 11, I thought I'd give it another go, because I'd been going to Queensland Youth Orchestra concerts since I was born, and it looked like a lot of fun. I just wanted to be involved in that. So my stellar career in auditioning began. And since my father was the founder and still is the conductor of the Queensland Youth Orchestra, my auditions had to be 10 times better than anybody else's, so that nobody accused anybody of nepotism or favouritism. I was blissfully unaware of this, but it was an ideal situation to be in, where I just thought it was normal that nothing came easily. This was great through high school, because I always worked really hard for my auditions, harder than I needed to, as it happens. Then when I was in first year at the Queensland Conservatorium of Music, the very well-meaning concertmaster of the Queensland Philharmonic Orchestra at the time suggested I do a full-time audition just for the experience of doing a professional audition, never expecting me to get even close. I got the job. I was 18 and had to refuse it, saying that I was in first year university and wanted to finish my degree. Let me now tell you the process of how we do our auditions. There are at least 3 rounds, the first 2 of which are behind a giant black velvet curtain. There's a piece of carpet laid down on the path from the door to the room, to the piano, and you have, so that they can't tell whether you're a woman. So, you know that thing of, I'll cough here, or I'm going to be wearing high heels. They can't tell whether you're a woman or a man. And you have 5 minutes with the exposition of a Mozart concerto and 3 orchestral excerpts to prove that you're worthy to progress to the next round. And it's pretty full on. In the second round, you might have 10 minutes, again behind a screen. It doesn't matter whether you've been the concertmaster of the Berlin Philharmonic or whether you're best friends with the entire first violin section, all of these things happen, or you're having an affair with the principal second violin. That's the idea of the anonymity. But those 15 minutes can determine the rest of your life. Really, we have a job for life and it's $1 million. You're giving someone $1 million because it's so hard to fire us. So it's amazing that that kind of decision can be determined in 15, 20 minutes. Anyway, then they take the screen away for the third round just in case you're a non-psychopath or your bow arm looks like a mangled chicken wing. But the Western Australian Symphony Orchestra and Melbourne Symphony Orchestra are peculiar in this country in that we don't take the screen down at all and at the end, and you remain anonymous until we shake your hand at the practice room and you're appointed to trial. When he introduced the talk, was the stat 20% of people are successful with your grants? I just thought I'd mention that our success rate is probably more like 0.05%. Really. I just thought, gosh, that's exciting, I might go into academia. You know, but we know that, we accept that. So anyway, my early success had the opposite effect. I now thought that every time I auditioned for a job, I'd get it, because I was awesome. So the next job I went for, I didn't even pass the first round when I really actually wanted a job. So then I decided to go to America and do a master's instead, because I thought it had a bit more of learning to do. I did have a lot more learning. I still have more learning to do. And then obviously it was time to come home and try and get a job. I had my sights set on the Australian Chamber Orchestra after I'd attended a life-changing performance of them playing Olivier Messiaen's From the Canyons to the Stars as part of the Bicentennial Festival in Brisbane. He was in the audience as well. I don't know if you've listened to any Messiaen, but he's actually a god of 20th century composition. It was really, I'm still sitting there, and he was in the audience, and I just thought, you know, one of those moments in your life where everything just changes and you just open up a whole new universe of possibilities. So that was definitely a seminal moment. I failed the ACO audition. 6 months later, I went back again and failed that audition. 6 more months later, I went back and they just kind of rolled their eyes, and I had a hung parliament. So they gave me a pre-trial of a month, and then a trial for a year, and then a year's probation, then finally put me on a year's contract because that's all they offer. See, then they're the opposite from us. They only give anybody a year contract. It's extraordinary. I think they might have just given me the job just to stop me from auditioning. Anyway, I remained in that wonderful, amazing job for 5 years and got to travel the world. We got to travel Australia 9 times a year. We've travelled regionally in every state of Australia. We'd go to Europe once a year, South America, Asia, everywhere. It was extraordinary. Played in the best concert halls with extraordinary soloists and learnt more about music and ensemble playing than any one teacher had taught me. But after a while, I got sick of the sight of my suitcase and the fact that I couldn't keep a goldfish, let alone a boyfriend, and decided to settle down in Melbourne, which I had always coveted as my spiritual home. I'm from Brisbane, but I don't know, we came here 9 times a year, and this place is really special, I think. Melbourne's just the right balance of cultural and edgy and big, but not too unfriendly, and I hated living in Sydney as well. No offence for Sydney-siders. There were 3 jobs going in the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, and I thought, well, I've been in the Australian Chamber Orchestra travelling the world for 5 years. I'll get that job easily. Failed the first round. Thank God for the screen. They didn't know who it was. And I spent the next 3 months in my pyjamas, using the mantelpiece of my fireplace as a music stand and doing nothing but practising. And that was when I finally learned, and I was in my 30s, to remove all emotion from the task and just get on with it. I got my job that I have now as the assistant principal second violin, and have been thankful ever since that I didn't get that first one, which was the number 4 concertmaster in the first violins. It's much more stressful in the first violins. So here I am, 18 years later, and I guess you could call me a success. a lot of which I owe to the fact that when you get a job in the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, you're immediately validated and sought after as a musician. But the only reason I'm there instead of someone else is that I was a pit bull and wouldn't take no for an answer and just kept plugging away at it. Stubborn. Now for the clincher. 4 years ago, even though I had my job forever, a principal job in the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra, that should be enough. The number one principal job came up 4 years ago, which I had been acting in regularly for 15 years, and everyone in the section begged me to apply. I practiced so much that I actually ended up in hospital with, well, they tested me for MS and I had spinal taps and all the neurologists could come up with was systemic exhaustion. And I still went ahead with the audition. Again, I didn't get past the first round. And the person who got the job had been my underling for 10 years and had also said that I taught him everything he knows about playing in orchestra. Yes, which makes me a successful teacher. Anyway, he's now my boss and he's fabulous, just for the record. And I'm so glad that I've been nice to him all that time. File that one away. But I was actually totally devastated. And my colleagues were mortified as well that they'd voted me out unknowingly because of the screen. It was bad for everybody. It was really bad for everybody for ages. And since we all had to sit there every day and work together and function as a section, I had to very quickly find a positive way to view this very public and deep failure. Because when you're behind the screen, and it's fine if you travel to another city, no one knows you're there. If you don't tell anyone you go for a job, nobody knows that you've gone for the job. But my entire section knew I was there because I wasn't on the panel for a start. So that was a no-brainer. It was horrendous. I was very resentful and really upset, but only in private at home for about 18 months. But slowly things not only got okay, but I started to see what an enormously large workload he had and the huge responsibilities he had to shoulder, going to endless meetings, having to have really difficult conversations with colleagues about their health or playing. And I eventually saw that the turn of events was a blessing. I do so many things outside of MSO, all of which I would have had to given up. I was chosen to be, around the time of that trauma, see, the universe works in strange ways if you're listening and looking, actually, because I was chosen, you can't audition, to be the Australian representative in an amazing thing called the World Orchestra for Peace, which meets annually somewhere in the world. And this orchestra was founded by Sir Georg Scholti, is aligned with UNESCO, is conducted by Valery Gergiev, and is made up of principal players from 33 of the world's best orchestras. So I could be sitting next to Ed van der Spa, the principal viola of the London Symphony Orchestra. One year my desk partner was this enormous gypsy creature, Tibor, who's the principal second violin of the Vienna Phil and the most extraordinary player and creature. So next month, I'm playing Mahler at the Proms in London with those people. And if I had his job, I simply wouldn't be allowed to get the time off. Another really exciting thing I've done just lately is form a trio of violin, piano and clarinet called Plexus, with the express goal of commissioning new works from composers and collaborating with artists across all disciplines. We launched in February, have played 11 world premieres written for us in 4 sold-out concerts. We've 16 more premieres to go this year and over 50 more composers writing for us. And seriously, it is the most exhilarating work I've ever done as a musician, and just time-wise, it would have been impossible had I won that principal job. And if I'm being completely honest with myself and you today, I would have to say that my MSO ego bruising formed a large percentage of my motivation for creating this group. But the result is that not only are we contributing to the cultural fabric of this country, but my playing and confidence have improved out of sight. Can I say that in Australia? Can I say that, I feel like I'm getting so much better? You can teach an old dog new tricks, you can. And that also feeds very positively back into my role at the MSO. I'm much better at my job now because I've done something outside of it. Anyway, my point is that my devastation, if I had not disciplined myself, taken a step back, and looked for a different perspective, it could have really destroyed my sense of worth if I'd let it. I've seen lots of people fall prey to bitterness and resentment and despondence and not be able to get past that for the rest of their careers. You see them sitting there. Finally, I'd like to talk about my amazing dad. His name's John, and his only formal qualification is a Bachelor of Architecture. He only ever wanted to do music, but his father wouldn't let him because it's not a real profession. His father wasn't even a cab driver. So Dad had to wait until he was 35 when his father died to fully pursue his dream. Everyone would say that 35 years old is way too late to become a professional musician, but nothing would stop him. He threw himself into studying violin, viola and conducting. He founded the Queensland Youth Orchestra 47 years ago. He gave birth to us in the same year. Well, he didn't give birth, but we're the same age. And he's changed thousands of young musicians' lives. Every professional orchestra in Australia employs many QIO alumni, and there are QIO alumni all over the world in orchestras and string quartets and everywhere teaching. He mortgaged our house in the 1970s so that QIO could go to the Lausanne Festival in Switzerland, so they could go overseas for the first time. He's a passionate, stubborn, idealistic, perfectionist 81-year-old who still has 15 violin and viola students and conducts QIO every Saturday morning. On the phone yesterday, he was telling me about planning Mahler 8 for 2016. That piece is called Symphony of 1,000. It has a huge choir and billions of people on the stage, and it's really hard. And I was just going, Dad, you'll be 83. His awards and accolades include an MBE, an AM, the Sir Bernard Hines Award for Services to Music in Australia, the Paul Harris Rotary Award, which I think is the highest award that the Rotary people can give you, the Don Banks Award for Services to Music from the Australia Council, the Millennium Award for the Arts from the Queensland Government from 2000, honorary doctorates from the University of Queensland and Griffith University in music, not architecture. He's an honorary citizen of Boys Town for services to youth in Australia, and last year he was a finalist for Queenslander of the Year and was nominated for Senior Australian of the Year. Here's the punchline. Dad thinks he's a failure. His choice to be in the same place every Saturday morning for 47 years meant that he could never be a full-time professional conductor, which involves endless travel. I don't know too many professional conductors who've made such a contribution to anything else except their own pockets and massive egos. He's my hero and an exceptional role model. So, what have I learned about failure? That there is only one true failure, and that is to never learn or progress from an outcome that didn't match my expectations. If I feel like a victim of my circumstances, then I have to acknowledge that I've put myself in that situation. I have to man up, take responsibility and try again, or change the circumstances. I have to think creatively, find out what I'm really good at and what I really believe in, and plough forward undaunted if I have clear enough goals and a strong enough spirit. I must be gracious in my personal perceived defeats and keep on nodding, smiling and chatting to the taxi drivers of Australia. So really, thank you so much for having me along today to talk to you. It's been a huge honour, and I hope that you have a wonderful day. And any questions?
Would anyone like to ask a question or make a comment? Or ask for an encore?
I've practiced anything.
How do you cope with the bitter and twisted people sitting there in the corner, sniping away grumpy for 20 years or so?
It's a funny thing because if you've got a certain, you think in a symphony orchestra there's about 85 full-time players, and you think, oh well, I'm just one of a large number of people, but actually one person can make an enormous difference. I mean, if a Prime Minister or a President if one individual can make an enormous difference, you've got to remember that you can too. So those people are very likely to come up to you at work and say, oh, isn't this conductor revolting? Or, God, he's such an idiot, he doesn't know what he's doing. And you could just say, well, but isn't the music fantastic? And they go, oh yeah. So you don't have to subscribe to the negativity, is what I'm saying. And so that has two effects. That it might make them think, oh, maybe I shouldn't be so negative. But on the other hand, it makes them think, don't go up to her because you won't get a bitch session out of it. Do you know what I mean? So you can influence your surroundings by choosing how to conduct yourself just as a default setting, I think.
Presumably
Anyhow, thank you for that talk. It was very inspiring. I'm sure everyone here has appreciated
thank you.
it. And although we do work in a very different sector from you, it rang so many bells for us, and academic careers along apprenticeships too.
Yeah.
So with quite a lot of setbacks. in
Any
the way.
pathway is going to have its obstacles. I think.
Yes. Oh, well, yeah, but ours have quite a few, and they're quite personal in the way that yours are
Yeah.
as well. But my question was, now presumably you're sometimes in a position, as I am in my sector, to make decisions about the fate of others,
All the
sometimes
time.
quite quickly.
Yeah.
Have you got any advice for us on how to turn your experience into good decision making, and also where you are turning people down, how do you speak to people to avoid them being traumatised and bitter?
Yeah, well, when girls, I run a program with the Melbourne Symphony Orchestra and the Australian Youth Orchestra combined, which is a fellowship, an orchestral fellowship. We have to be the very best Australian Youth Orchestra student to get accepted. And what you do, you get a week-long mentorship with a member of the orchestra. You do a pretend audition the first day, and a week later you do a real audition. And the success rate of that is very low as well, because we're looking for a certain standard. It's a great course in that it has a direct pathway to the profession, whereas a lot of the younger courses in the Australian Youth Orchestra, they're fun, they're great, but they don't lead directly. So when the people audition and they don't get through, it's really much more devastating, because that's the first time they've dipped their toe in the water of the profession. But you've just got to be really honest with them and give them very honest feedback and say, look, don't worry. And I always share my stories that I've failed billions and billions of auditions, and it's always turned out to be for a reason, or you think, thank goodness for that, because it's just true. I mean, maybe I'm a bit of a self-propagandist, and I've looked at things like that so I don't get sucked into my own, depression or whatever. But, if you give them really specific feedback and say, well, this is what we're looking for, and this is just where you fell slightly short of the mark, you're nearly there, you just need to work on this, that was fantastic. But yeah, so we're very honest. And in fact, if you do an MSO audition, we had a second violin audition the other day, there were 75 applicants for it. It's enormous. I mean, we've only ever had 30. I don't know what's going on. But you sit there for 3 days and write detailed notes, even about bar numbers, and then that's collated by the administrators, and you are entitled to a copy of the feedback. So they get extensive feedback, like very detailed. You played sharp in this bar, in this note. Yeah. Did I answer your question?
It was good, thank you.
Yeah, I'm on a lot of panels too for big awards for the Australian Youth Orchestra. We've got $20,000 grants for overseas studies, but I mean that's much easier because our world is incredibly small. I don't know if you wouldn't know all the applicants for the things you have to make decisions about, would you? Or you'd know most of them?
No, we wouldn't.
See, I know absolutely all of them, some of them since they were 13, for 10 years. And so you do know about their character, and you know about whether they're a person who's just kind of a bit naughty and lazy, or if they're a really committed, deserving person. So it makes it much easier that we know them for a long time. You have to. I mean, it's very rare that we get an application from someone we've never encountered before.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
Erica Harvest.
Oh, yeah. See, she loves music the most of anyone.
Yeah, it's true. Can you tell me what you do at the point of rejection, at the point of that failure, to catapult yourself? Like, do you use self-talk? What do you do just in that moment?
Well, first you go and get really, really drunk. That's really part of the therapy. You just have to feel sorry for yourself for a certain amount of time. I think you do, because you put so much work into it. But if you got to a certain stage, then you know that it's not hopeless. Do you know what I mean? So you get yourself out of it, but you've got to give yourself time. Otherwise, everything's coloured with kind of resentment, and you've got to look at your motives and make sure that they're not vengeful or driven from you know, something that's not going to ring true with people, actually. I think that'd be ethical. Yes?
So what, thank you for that talk, it's fantastic. What was the turning point after 18 months of literary resentment?
There wasn't a point. It's just, it's like a wound healing. You know, you've got this thing and it's bandaged for ages, and then all of a sudden you take the bandages off, but it wasn't all of a sudden. Do you know what I mean? It's just slowly, and I mean, I have a 10-year-old girl as well, so I mean, that's really good for perspective as well. I can't say to my students, you know, if you want to stop disappearing up your own arse and be like, oh, I played out of tune, it's a disaster, you should actually have a child, because, you know, if you make a mistake in music, nobody dies. But that's a different, that's really been, that changed my life as well, thinking, oh, music, gosh, you know, my kid's sick, you know. Yeah, so that really helped me as well. I don't think there's a point, I think there's just a kind of philosophical standpoint you can take where you have to, when you're a grown-up, live your life by certain large guidelines that you've set for yourself as important. And, you know, some of them are harder to stick to than others, because it's very easy to indulge yourself and be bitter and mean and twisted and bitch about people at work, but ultimately you just kind of get sucked down in this spiral, and it doesn't do any good for anybody.
There we are. Monica.
Thank you.
Well, I think you would agree with me. Monica's address was very inspiring. The themes that I picked up from those were really 3 Ps: perspective, keep it; persistence, keep on doing it; and passion. And if I had to draw a link between Monica's world, which to me wasn't so far removed from some of the hallowed halls that we all work in, to winning or not winning grants and so on, is to stick to the really thing, you know, carve out a grant or application or a fellowship which goes to the heart of student learning and solves the problem, something to do with student learning, because student learning changes lives if it's more effective, and really try to get to the heart of the matter, and try and come up with some sort of solution or iteration to one of the great challenges of educating in higher education. Now I'm going to introduce Sally, unless Scott's hovering to tell me I've fluffed my line.
Yes, I'm hoping he's hovering to put my presentation
Oh, good.
back up.
So that'd be useful. Excellent. Well, while you're doing that, without drawing any attention to yourself, I'll persist with
It has
moving
gone
on.
entirely, has it?
I don't know, I haven't.
I might have just gone to sleep.
I think it's
so
just
you might
a mistake.
need to-
That's what I'm saying.
And you might need a password. Anyway.
Just
I think
control
you'll
alt
have to
delete,
need a password,
Scott.
so you might need help with that. Unless you know it. Great. Good. So moving on from Monica's wonderful address, we have another one with our revered friend and colleague, Sally Kift. And I'm sure Sally is not a new name to you. Sally has been around for a while, like a few of the rest of us in the room who don't look quite as young as we used to. No offence, Sally. Where I'm going with this is, I first knew Sally when she was a senior lecturer and teaching law at QUT, and became the Prime Minister's Teacher of the Year. You did, didn't you? You did. And I was a similar worker bee at Curtin University on the other side of the country. Anyway, it's been wonderful to see Sally have her own share of successes and persistence and passion over the years. And Sally's going to share that with us now, that the technology has magically reinvented itself. And I think it's that one.
Yes.
That's it. Failure as feed forward for success. And so Sally, thank you and welcome.
Oops, and there's a clicker somewhere. Now Bella's got some other one, so thank you very much. So thank you, Scott, for fixing me up. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to Beverly for those warm words. And thank you, Monica. That was just, I'm just going to be boring, yeah? Which is really tragic. But it's not a riveting topic, though. Again, I think it is about, as Beverly hopefully summarised, persistence, passion, and perspective. So I was a bit worried doing this. It's one of those things where you get to sit and write it, and then you think, what was I thinking? Saying I could do that. So that's my interpretation. I can't offer you even a tarnished silver bullet to change failure into success. So I'm just going to talk about feeding forward, failure as feed forward, and have a plan B, because I think we've all got to be quite resilient. I think Monica put us in a really good place for that. So, I don't know, you're going to have to bear with me. I think we've got to look again at what the grants program is about. It is very competitive and it's category 1. I think we do have to revisit what a good application is. I'm sorry, this is probably going to be quite tedious. The elusive search for a sure winner. Not quite sure that there is actually such a thing. The desirability then of a plan B. So I'm picking up on Monica's thing about living your life by large guidelines. So you've got to have something that you can hark back to, because that makes it effective and efficient. And I wish I'd known about the P's. I was doing many C's at the end, because B is before C, and that was something about feed forward. I don't know. Used me at the time. I also spent half a day finding there was no YouTube video clip that I could show for this, which is very disappointing. But I did find this. It does depend on your perspective, you know. So this is a wrong answer. I think it's a true answer. It made me laugh. In the absence of being able to find a YouTube video. So apropos something, I think. Now, what am I? I'm not a single lady. Well, I'm a range of things. I'm something about a law academic, as Beverly mentioned. I got promoted to associate professor and professor primarily on the basis of teaching. I've done learning and teaching stuff, published, got some grant successes, published externally and internally. Seconded when I got the first year fellowship to be director of first year experience by the DVCA, which was sort of a turning point for me. Then did the fellowship, then was a discipline scholar, and now I'm at James Cook University. But all I can remember are the epic fails. So it's a bit like, well, except, you know, I think they make you who you are. And I've had to nominate the biggest failures. It was when I was shortlisted to be a teaching award winner and then didn't win. And that was back in the Oscar days, where you lined up on the side of the stage all the potential winners, and then the real winner, to be compared with the pretenders, got announced, and you just got left there languishing on the side of the stage. So I felt like a very big loser after that one. I didn't get from level B to level C, lecturer to senior lecturer, on my first go. That was an epic fail. When I applied to be associate professor, the dean, I'm just sharing this with you because he shared it with me, the dean said that he'd taken the temperature of the senior staff, who unanimously, so these were all my colleague professors and associate professors, who unanimously recommended that he not support my application to associate professor. That was a bit crippling. I got promoted in the end anyway, because it was a central panel. If I'd been in the faculty, it would have been terrible. And so it goes on, you know, putting grant applications, they're not successful, putting applications for jobs, they're not successful. So I don't know that I'm quite as famous as all the other failures. This is the fun part of the presentation, in case you didn't get it. I don't think I'm as famous as all those other failures. But this took me a long time to do as well, trying to get those colours exactly right. Much better than trying to think about what you're going to say. But this is, if at first you don't succeed, I thought that was a nice thing to say. You're running about average, but of course the tragedy for us is you're not running at about average. If at first you don't succeed, you're running sort of those percentages. So that, and of course this is in the situation where in the round 2 grants, as you know, you can only apply for round 2 grants if you had a successful expression of interest in the first round. So we are around 21% in 2000 and round 2 in 2013, 22.4%, 21%, 27% back in round 1 2012, and back in the last round of the ALTC it was around about 40%. But it's getting increasingly competitive, so you do actually have to have a plan B. And when you look at what that OLT help sheet that's been passed around says, and I think this is probably good advice, and this is where I was starting. Resubmission of previously unsuccessful grants, they encourage you to take the comments into account, that's useful, but even if you do so, it's no guarantee of success, and I think a number of you will have experienced that, and that's again quite devastating, because you think, you know, like a promotion application, let's go back to that helpful place, if you just do what they tell you to do, then you'll necessarily be successful the next time. Well, they're warning you that you're not going to be. And I think the second paragraph is actually quite useful. Use the experience you gained, along with the advice from the original assessors, to create essentially a new application. And I think that's pretty much where you've got to go back to. You know, that was a work in progress, what you've done. I think you've got to actually go back and rethink your whole application, rather than just resubmitting, as they say, the old application with minor edits. Each funding round's competitive. You're getting different assessors, as they warned you. There will be different assessors. And teaching's always progressing. And I think the cycles wax and wane about what's current and contemporary and what's not. So any revised application must be current and competitive alongside all the others. So very helpful so far, I'd suggest. I went back and looked at the program objectives, always good, as I constantly encourage my colleagues to do things from an evidence base as opposed to anecdotal. Wasn't greatly assisted, with great respect, by the program objectives. You've got to do good learning and teaching deeds, was what I got from that. The criteria are probably a little more helpful, and I wonder when it was the last time that you'd gone back and read the criteria. There's a page and a half explaining the criteria. I did that last night, which is what prompted me to do this slide again. So I know it's about programs and rationale and approach, and I've just tried to summarise. The key, I think, is this one about value for money and need for the project. For the sector as a whole, or particular organisations in the sector, national approaches or policies that both utilise and advance existing national and international knowledge, and then project management and budget. And I'm taking the other bits that I thought were important out of those. So again, this is the way I'm going to do this, and trying to do it reasonably helpfully is to say, well, this is the advice that they give. You get your feedback, you take it into account. Don't forget you're going to get completely new assessors next time. So reconceptualise the application, think about it, and I think again about value for money and need for the project. Because the other tedious thing I did was then go through all the feedback, the assessors' comments. So I'm starting with this is what the good application on that help guide that you've got there in front of you says. Again, I'm not so sure that any of those, and I'm saying this very respectfully, because I'm looking for the silver bullet, which there isn't one of. So I thought those 3 dot points that I bracketed were probably the most useful out of all those. Shows good cross-institutional collaboration and engagement with the industry, considers the work of past projects, considers the scope of the project beyond the home institution. These PowerPoints will go up somewhere, I think. I'm just trying to think what copyright breaches I've had. Like the click count thing. But I went back and found this by Elizabeth MacDonald, who some of you will recall was one of the first people in the original Carrick Centre. And I actually find this a little bit more useful. Having a clear, so USQ, Universities of Southern Queensland, used to do videos. I think I was subjected to one of them. Hopefully Siobhan might have been, or Beverly might have been, I don't know. We all sort of spoke about our special subjects. And you've got a link. I didn't find this all by my own. I did the old Google search. This is a WAND publication from the University, from the West Australian universities, about what makes good OLT applications. And so these were, so there should have been a video of this, but I couldn't find it. And I told you I was looking for a video. But this idea about having a clear focus and scope, the project fits, I'm sort of trying to underline the word, fits within the larger context. You've identified an issue, of course collaboration, all of them talk about collaboration. I like this idea of being astute about what needs to happen, and then we're back with commitment and passion and energy, those sorts of ideas. Clear measurable outcomes, deliverables of course, but understanding the difference between outcomes and deliverables. Wise words. Dissemination, and showing you awareness of what's happening in the institution and more broadly, so that you can target your dissemination. you're engaging with stakeholders, and that the processes will get you. The processes are practical, and the assessors can see it train through. See, there is no silver bullet. You're just going to have to go back and rethink what's going on, I think. And then, just to further annoy myself, because I thought I wasn't really getting anywhere with this, I went back and looked at all of the various assessors' reports, and you can find them there on the link down the bottom. So I just tried to pick out, again, what I thought were useful comments. So we need an important area and awareness of an issue that requires attention. So for me, that was first year experience, and then more latterly capstones. I thought things that needed attention. Legal education generally needs attention. Demonstrated knowledge of existing work, and explains how your proposal, and this was a constant theme, explain how your proposal differs from or builds on, rather than just referencing or claims to build on. Wise words again. Considers the project value, need and impact beyond the home partner institution. Realistic project plan. Specifies outcomes at appropriate stages. Again, I just wonder how much thought, and I'm using myself in this. These are ones that I think I find useful. So you may or may not find them useful, but I wonder myself, when you think about the outcomes, I just go, oh yes, I'll produce these will have these outcomes and these deliverables, and I do understand the difference, but not necessarily in a stage that's clearly articulated. I think engaging, there's so many networks now. You think about all the discipline networks. I'm a member of the Discipline Scholars Networks. There's the Council of Deans and all those people. So have you brought those sort of people in? You've got the strong team and the reference group, and you've made some attempt to explain what that is. Understanding the purpose and role of the evaluator. So I'm an evaluator on some of these projects now, and I love doing it because I learn stuff from them. But how are you proposing to use the evaluator? A very good critical friend all the way through. And sometimes the evaluator, if they're decent, not me, would spend some time with you formulating your application. Certainly I was lucky enough with my fellowship to have two very good colleagues, international colleagues, help me with formulating and thinking up what the application is. Demonstrating the support from the participating institutions, which, talking as a DVCA, is difficult because they come to me in a great swag. And I rarely have time to read them and make sure that they're written in English, let alone try to elaborate more on what contribution we're particularly going to make. Peer reviewed at the institutional level. There's some I sit also, I should have disclosed, on the I sit on the National Standing Committee for the grants, and we're starting to see, particularly now that they're Category 1, a very long tail of applications, particularly when the EOIs and in the seeds, which may or may not have gone through a process. So have they been peer reviewed in your institution? OLT will not fund institutional core business. And I liked this comment, too much of what I want to do to be compared with what the sector needs. So again, I'm just trying to build up a sense of what might be helpful if you can be reflective about your applications. And I don't know. And here's another screen of the latest assessment report. Again, I think probably the most interesting from those are a number of applications don't show sufficient consideration of the broader needs of the sector, and or do not engage nationally. Applications don't always have clearly articulate the impact on student learning. Applications need to draft a clear vision for wider applicability of project fundings and outcomes for the future. And that one down there about comments on specific proposal applications need to clearly define and outline the impact the project will have on student learning specifically and teaching and learning more generally. And that was Bev's point again. And I think we see applications where a lovely idea, but how is it actually going to impact on student learning? What do I do next? Oh yes, okay, so what to do? Having gone back and looked at the evidence again. Well, I think you do need to think again about your topic, what the priority area, and what the contemporary, because it will have moved in the space of 6 months or a year, what the contemporary, but it needs to be authentic, spin on that is. Collaboration and scale, appropriate. You can't do lots of collaboration for $50,000 seed projects, but more collaboration for the 220,000. And we're going to come to a point on this in a moment as well. And the value for money, so the need. What is the sector need around this? You must engage with current work, and there is so much work out there that that it gets quite difficult, but there's a couple of ways into that. And your own, I think. Because it has got something to do with your track record and your interest and your passion and your perspectives as well. How does it build on that work, both your own and the other work, quite coherently? Full stops after things. Sustainability, full stop. Impact, full stop. Where is the need? Again, where is the need? If it's an issue for your university, your discipline or the sector, then it's probably a shared issue. And how to differentiate and persuade that it's a standout real need. What is the point of differentiation? Perhaps it's a discipline that hasn't been particularly funded or a new area. Or we saw a couple come through, and you're going to see some examples in a moment, with the new Colombo plan. But again, it has to be, that's my authentic idea about spin. No point just writing in new Colombo plan standards international if it's not going to be authentic. Here are the program priorities again. Yes, of course, that's what they are. I don't know that, I think there's a bit of agonising about whether they're currently up to date, but you can fit most of anything that you wanted to do, I would have thought, with great respect, which is what lawyers say when they've just insulted something. With great respect, I think you could fit almost anything into those, within those priorities, but where is the greatest need? Because I think a lot of those priorities have had a lot of grant money gone into them now, and a lot of disciplines within those priorities have had a lot of grant money go in, so the fact that you're in the priority zone, I don't think is enough. Where is the greatest need, and where are the current or contemporary issues for the sector? But of course, you've got to tie it in with the priorities. There's actually this quite good resource which I found when I started Googling things, which again is tragic from my perspective. Some nice ways again to think about things, because I think you do have to be critically reflective in a quite resilient way about the application that you've made. So no bad idea can be disguised by good writing to look like a good idea, and a good idea poorly presented can be misunderstood, underrated or overlooked by reviewers and funding bodies. And the starting point for an idea is your own experience of teaching in your discipline. I think that's the authenticity, and that does seem to come through in your compelling narrative. But you might like to have a look at that guide. It's quite thick. It's quite useful, I think. Herzer did a review of a range of things. They looked at Australian tertiary learning and teaching scholarship and research from 2007 to 2012, did an analysis from a variety of perspectives and tried to draw out some themes. So here I am now looking for the, for the killer topic or the killer subject or something where you can get in the zone. They looked for common themes and methodologies. I love when it Mac. See, that really annoys me. It's gone broken there. Themes and methodologies. That was all on one line. Mac to PC. 16 themes were identified over the last 5 years. They did so 300 grants. Think about that. 300 grants, 2007 to 2012. Widespread institutional involvement, all right, so you've got to have institutionally involved. I found this next one quite interesting. Only 28 lead investigators involved in more than one project. It's the sub-point, I think, that's interesting here. When you look at the other measures of impact, those 28 made significant contributions in other areas. They published and had conference presentations. So they're probably your serious learning and teaching people who are using it for a variety of purposes. But then a lot of grants were on assessment and feedback, will, quality assurance, transition and retention, focusing mainly around educational intervention, types of research methods for qualitative and quantitative in equal measures. So again, I don't know that necessarily gets you very far, but it gets you in the zone of what people are doing. The overarching themes that they'd identified, there were 18, so I don't know where the 16 came from. I couldn't quite work that out. But there's, so look at them. Graduate attributes. I think graduate attributes in the standards, threshold learning outcome sense. High degrees by research. I think there is something now. We're seeing a lot of applications coming through around HDRs, what an Australian HDR is to be compared with other HDRs, what the outcomes for HDR students are. They need employability skills now. Got the training and things. I don't see capstones there, but so that hasn't happened. The educational technologies, number 5, were broken up into another 26 sub-themes. So at least you can see the sorts of things that people are investigating and the potential for topics. This is what what HERDSA ERGA members, the University of Adelaide group, the HERDSA fellows and the HERDSA members thought were the hot topics. The listed amongst the 5 most important for Australian higher education for the next 5 years by different groups. Again, you know, you take it or leave it to some extent. So I'm quite fixated on capstones at the moment. I think they're effective and efficient ways of gathering assurance of learning data, and I don't think we have much experience of them. I think Nikki Lee's current senior fellowship in the space is really interesting, and we did a project, my team at QUT and I did a project on capstones in law because we have no experience of them in law. But you know, there's a range of things there. You know, there must be something coming out of the current agenda, you would have thought. We're going to enter into a demand-driven system. You know, universities, vice-chancellors are talking about offering budget versions and proper versions of the same course. There'll be whole disciplines that are potentially likely to be wiped out because of low-cost providers coming in. Some universities are talking about bundling up all sorts of other things and putting it on the Never Never. So if you've got an expensive field trip, bundle it into the fee, put it off onto the government funding, and then that makes it an attractive course for students to do. What's quality look like in a demand-driven system? What are we going to do about STEM in a demand-driven system? Engineers are already oversupplied in Australia. How do you refresh and make any of those things current? You know, you've got to try and think, I think, quite creatively about what the possibilities are under the existing priorities, understanding what the sector needs, and what your discipline needs, and where the opportunities are perhaps as identified in a range of these things, and work out your application. So what I tried to helpfully do, which you've got in front of you, was just go through, because in the quite fortunate timing way that these things have about themselves, I've just got a one sheet, and this looked really good when I finished it at midnight on Sunday. I now see that I didn't completely format it correctly, so number 21 is in the wrong font, and I didn't, this is my self-critique, and then between 4 and 5 there is another point that needed another number. But anyway, putting those errors to one side, what I just did was go through and take off the titles of the grants that have just been awarded, because there might be something in there for us. So these are the 2014 successful round 1 grants. And what I've done, taking the title, said how much they got funded for, and the +1 means that's the collaborator, that's the number of collaborations. So the first one, establishing graduate employability in business schools, business school alumni through establishing an Australian business case network. I actually remember this application. The suggestion was that business does its business by writing business case studies, and there were very few authentic Australian case studies. Now, I don't know whether that's right or not, but the assessors seemed to think it was right, and it was thought worthwhile funding for $50,000 with a +1 collaborator, with the original institution +1. You can go and look at all these on the sites. But if you just want to take a couple of minutes, if we might, and just run your eyes down that and see whether you have any particular observations about what's being funded. You know, I want to look at this and say, oh yes, I can see some real themes coming out in this.
Are there any extra copies of that?
Yeah.
I needed 35, sorry.
Poor Bella. I was supposed to send things through, but as I said, midnight Sunday is where you get what you get.
I'm sorry, I don't want to take time away from the workshop activity. I've got a couple more points to make. But any initial observations? Cross-disciplinary is interesting, isn't it? They're quite eclectic. It's an eclectic bunch of topics, I must say. And you know, you think about the priorities and all the things, all the comments. There's some interesting issues there. You can see really some quite innovative ideas around doing things like improving visually impaired students' access to graphics in higher education, collaborative development of a blended humanitarian engineering course for the Australian engineering sector, the transfer of pedagogical content knowledge in tertiary discipline. So that was the idea that there was a lot of, how do we say that? How did you refer to it, Beverly? Older, not as young as we used to be, chemistry teachers will soon be leaving the sector. So how do you, there's a whole body of knowledge, almost a body of corporate knowledge that will be disappearing out of the sector. How do we retain that in the sector? You know, it's a really interesting idea, isn't it? And a similar one I thought was something about number 17, developing a course handover tool to support new course coordinators. You know, that fraught thing where, oops, it's your turn to course coordinate now, bye. You know, there should be some sort of handover, some sort of succession planning. So I don't know whether this doesn't, I don't think this gives anyone much comfort, but there, you can see that the sorts of things that they're funding at the moment, the OLT, I suppose. Underdone disciplines would be my other thing. I don't think there'd been anything from agricultural studies in the past. I remember that we funded a whole vet thing where all the vet schools, the whole 7 vet schools in Australia put something together. Siobhan, I was hoping you might have something, observations.
There was an ag project funded last year.
Yes, because they presented a poster at the
Right.
conference
So that's 2 now. Yeah, to be compared with, you know, other disciplines like nursing and health. They're a constant stream of health applications in all sorts of areas. So anyway, I don't know whether that helps or hinders, but it's just, I think it's interesting, and nothing again like an evidence base, to see the sorts of things and to think about where you're placed in that, and apologies again for the formatting. And I think you should also look at the fellowships, because while they're not, and I understand very clearly, I know the difference between a program of fellowship activities and a project which is a grant, but again, the fellows are usually in areas where you would think that there's something happening. So if you're trying to think, and this doesn't mean undermining where you have put your own grant applications in, but just trying to understand, you know, what the logical next step and how you might build on those sorts of activities might be. And then at the OLT forum, you know, and I think this is a real issue for us, new models for 21st century learners. A group of fellows presented at the recent OLT forum, and this was the wonderful Peter Goodyear did a little summary slide, so I'm acknowledging him and the work that we all did there. David Bowd essentially saying, well, good learning and teaching will be good learning and teaching now and for the next models of learners, but some interesting conceptualisation of what good models and the good features of good models might look like. And then I thought it might have been something about scalable, personalised learning. Jeff Crisp always speaks very coherently about flexible, open, coherent and integrated provision. Phil Forenick was also looking at employability. For me, employability is a huge issue. Students are going to be paying a large amount of money for their degrees now. You know, do you think we're still going to be having arguments about whether they want a job at the end of it? And so how do we embed? So this is a secret. I think academic language and learning advisors are critical people in any curriculum design. I think the library people, professionals, in terms of whole of institution approaches are critical. But I think careers and employment people have really ramped up their importance for all of us. How do we embed sensibly career development learning and planning around that in an integrated and incremental way over the course of the degree, culminating in capstone? Career development learning is one of our graduate attributes now. We've said, you know, we've taken Beverly's advice. There are standard graduate attributes that almost everyone has. So what are our differentiating points? Well, we're something about Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander reconciliation, something about career development learning, and something about the tropics. They're our graduate attributes. And of course, in the disciplinary way, we would explore all the rest. So that, I think that was Phil Forenick's point. And Peter Goodyear's worried about the fragmentation that seems to be coming out of the way that we're all doing these things quite differently. So again, I'm not suggesting you go straight for an employability or personalised learning one, but I'm just wondering whether that's a spin you would put on your own. And if, it's a bit like further all in the alternative, Your Honour, which is how you plead in law. So if you don't believe everything I just said, here's another idea. Always have a plan B. And I'm just going to try and whiz through this quickly because I'm conscious of time. So I think you need to align, don't force this. This was my idea about authenticity. And I think it's Monica's talking about hunger, passion and obsession. You've got to align your focus with your individual school, faculty and uni focus. You've got to build on existing knowledge. We saw that in all the applications, but that needs to be your own experience and knowledge as well. This is a research project, so I still really like that Randy Bass article which has talked about problematising teaching. To have a problem in teaching is not a bad thing. It's an area for investigation. You have a problem in research, and that's a good thing because you do a research exercise. And then there's this, sorry, lots and lots of words because I'm a lawyer, around scholarship of learning and teaching. And I just like Lee Shulman's conceptualisation of that, making it public and available for critique in a form on which others can build. So, as soon as you write your application, you can start workshopping it at conferences or presenting papers on it. So there's an immediate payoff. And in doing that, you might be able to enhance your your conceptualisation of the project. And you should always communicate and disseminate if you're interested in that sort of thing for career and personal aggrandising. And there's all various ways that you can do that from the work that you put into the grant. So the grant isn't a piece of work that just gets put to one side. And I'm very keen on this because after I was the big alpha loser in my first attempt at a National Teaching Award, one of my very good colleagues at QUT said, well, make it work for you. Well, look at all that work you put into the application, try and get some conference publications out of it. Think about how you might conceptualise that more broadly and use that as a platform. And I got some very dodgy conference presentations out of it and did get some dodgy articles out of it. So who knows, Beverly? There's all sorts of opportunities if you're creative. And this is, it's a bit of gratuitous advice really, which may or may not be worthwhile for you, but I think Monica again set the tone for us on this. I really think you need to have a very solid core and understanding and belief in what it is that you're doing, because that's what sustains you. So set your priority, you can't do everything. Take some time to decide personally and professionally what your relevant career path is and draw motivation and perseverance and resilience from that. You should be open to change, I think, tapping into sector priorities. So you should always be open to change, but at some point I think you need to understand what it is, what's your passion around this, so that you don't get too deterred by failures along the way, or when your senior colleagues say that the Dean shouldn't support you. Take advantages or understand the advantages and disadvantages of being an early adopter. Sometimes it's great to be ahead of the wave, sometimes your time is not, it's just not your time. So who knows what that is, and don't be dissuaded. So first year, I can say this, the year that I got my fellowship on first year experience, we also put in what I thought was a quite well considered grant around first year aggrandisement, and got told there was nothing in first year from the grant perspective. And this in the same year, nothing in first year, it had all been done, CSHE were doing all their surveys, nothing in it. And I got the fellowship. So, you've just got to, if that's what you think, then you might like to keep pursuing it. And align yourself with change agents. So that lovely question that you asked about, what advice you give and how you play it forward. So, a lot of us have been the beneficiaries of very helpful people over time, so you play it forward and you'd be surprised how generous people are in providing time and expertise. Keeping an eye on the bigger long-term picture for continued relevance, think about when you're going to take your calculator. You know all this stuff, but this is relevant also, I think, to reformulating a grant application. Be persuadable always to other ways of doing things. One of my great frustrations with my discipline law is that it is so insular, and it's only when we start stepping outside and see other ways to do things that I think we actually learn a lot. And there's a lot of benefits in that cross-disciplinary work. And change doesn't have it must be led. So as you can see, this is all coming from a nice article that I saw from Jeff Scott when Aubrey used to run those forums. Every member of staff is a leader of change in their own areas and expertise, and I actually believe that. Doesn't matter where you are necessarily in the hierarchy, you can lead. If you know, something, Mandela said it better than me. And I know, this is how I had a go at trying to understand what that hierarchy, I just thought that might be useful. There's an article, so you start down quite low as a beginning teacher, and then you move up in steps. It's never linear like this. Your career waxes and wanes. You know, you have children, you step out, you come back in. Sometimes you're doing leadership positions, sometimes you're not. Sometimes you're a course coordinator, subject coordinator. So it's not necessarily linear like that. But it's nice to think of how you might keep trying to move yourself up if you're interested in that sort of thing. I'm not suggesting that's for everybody. So these were my C's. It's competitive in category 1, again just trying to amuse myself really. Very good applications are not getting up, and I can apologise for that, and I think it's only going to get worse. You need a compelling narrative, so your application needs to tell a story, much like fellowships, much like awards applications, much like your promotion applications. What is the identified need? How is it going to take the sector or the discipline further? What's your big issue that you're going to address, and how will it be taken up? If you're trying to be compelling about that. You should always have critical friends and critiques. That was the idea of the workshopping things, and a focus always on, oh, I've dropped something off there. Oh no, career and curriculum enhancing. So it should always feed into your day job. This can't be considered to be something that you're doing separate. Try and make it work for you. So it's a plan, Bill, and B, and killing birds with stones. And that's my own picture. There you go. So there you are. That was all.
Questions, comments?
Yes.
You may not be in a position to answer this, but one of the reasons that funding agencies run expression of interest rounds is so that they can control failure rate. If they know in the second round they're going to have $10 and each of the expressions of interest is asking for $2, then they only accept 5 or 6, knowing that they'll, then that doesn't seem to happen with this OLT system, and I'm not sure why.
Well, I suppose it does depend on your conceptualisation of expression of interest. I don't know the figures precisely. I think the expression of interest are running about 50% successful. As you know, less than that.
It's a workload issue.
So Siobhan says it's a workload issue. I'm just repeating for the benefit of the tape. So if it's a good idea, and it's hard to know how these will prove up. When good ideas, how they look when they're beyond the 4 pages and the whole, you've considered all those various matters that need to be considered. So I think, so there is no answer, and it might be frustrating, but it's pretty much in the same category as resubmitting an application that you got good marks for, as it were, and then not being successful again. I'm not uncomfortable with the way the expressions of interest are going. Sorry, that's probably no particular comfort for anyone.
I'm not sure if this is the opposite question or not, but looking at the list of successful grants for round 1, I see that fewer than half of them, less than half, are C grants. So I'm not quite, somebody relatively new to it, I'm a little surprised that there aren't more C grants than there are.
It's interesting, isn't it? And again, I don't know, you're imagining that they're for the benefit of the tape. There's a bit of a sense now, is the sense that I'm getting, that there have been thousands of flowers, and where will we now be starting to get bang for buck in areas? And the seed grants are interesting as well. So we get a lot of applications for seed grants, and of course you know what the process is. They go through assessors, so they're all assessed by 2 people. The extension grants I'm putting to one side. They all get assessed by 2, but then at the National Standing Committee we see everything again, and anyone can discuss any grant, no matter how lowly ranked it might be, and every single grant is considered and a discussion had about it. So there's a degree of feedback there's a degree of oversight. So obviously they're the grants that sort of came out on top, and the standing committee, and then it goes to the SCAG,
Strategic Advisory Group.
Strategic Advisory Group, and they have another go at it. So I think there is a concern. So I'm just trying to interpret what might be going on. I think there is a bit of a concern about is little pockets of $50,000. How is that going to progress us further? And there are some big issues for us in the sector at the moment, don't you think? Big issues about STEM. And I know, so science, technology, engineering, maths, and I know that there was those grants that were funded, but perhaps there's still more work to be done. Seems to me to be big issues about HDR and what we're doing with that in the Australian sense. Big issues, and Beverly's well placed to talk about this, big issues about, you know, given the M things that I refuse to give a name to, given online, given the Tudge report, given the suggestion that MOOCs, Stuart, MOOCs, given, see now you made me say it. I'm so disappointed with myself. Given the sense that if we just put everything online, it would be so much cheaper and easier for everyone to do. You know, so what there needs to be a sector response around that, I think. You know, some intelligent discussion at a very high sector level, which probably needs, you know, 39 universities or whatever, you know, or some considerable number of universities thinking about what's the competitive possibilities, what are the efficiencies, what do we say about that, you know, a piece of work around that. And I don't know that funding little bits, or my own views, I suppose. So no real answer again to any of those. But I think what heartens me from doing that exercise, which I hope you might have found semi-useful, because I always look at them, and then I you know, you can go to the full descriptions of them, the abstracts of them, and get much better idea. You know, there are some good innovative ideas that are actually going to make, you can see that they would make a difference, I think.
Thank you very much for the work that you put into this, because I think it's been extremely beneficial for all of us.
Thank you.
But I did have one question. You touched on kind of what to do if you knew you'd put effort and energy into an application and then it didn't get up. You know, the idea of, you know, the research, the literature review did that would turn into a conference paper and so on. But I wonder if you could comment on what else there is. I mean, if you're still convinced that this is worth doing, what would be your advice of what you do with that, out with the OLT? Is that really the only game in town for Australia?
Oh, well, not necessarily. There is the ARC.
Yeah, okay.
Good luck with that. No, well, so I'm saying this, trying to say this carefully. It seems to me, and I can only do 10,000 words in half an hour. It seems to me that there should be a continuum. So particularly if you're looking at things around learning, you know, impact on student learning, usually that's part of your day job as well.
Yes.
So there might be little, even a university poor like mine has little seed grants funding, you know, that gets people started on things. So I think that, you know, get an idea and start with that and prove that up and start publishing. And you start, success often does build success. It's a trite but true expression to some extent, I think, as well. So there are institutional pots of money. Sometimes there are discipline pots of money. Now that's not always true, but different disciplines with their AD learning teaching networks and deans councils might have money. You can start pitching ideas. I know the health disciplines are very good at getting money, except we just closed down, didn't we? The Health Workforce Australia, we're just about to, so that's tragic. Thank you, vote here and often. So, you know, there were pots of money coming out of those areas. So I think you do need to be alive more broadly. There's still the HEP money, not so much as it was, but intelligent use of HEP money in areas. And I know that it's taken me a while to get the HEP money back in my institution to go out to and try and see things in faculties across. So we've identified our 17 biggest courses that have retention issues, and we're pushing, you know, with a limited range of things that you could do to try and enhance the course. Employability was one of them. So there's some issues around, you know, so. But no, again, no comprehensive answer. We're not in a happy state of affairs at the moment. And if you thought this was bad, you wait. It's going to get tighter. So we've got to be very effective and efficient about the money that we're using, the value that we get from it. I don't want to tell you the secret. I think extension grants are the best things in the whole entire world. I keep telling anyone what we can do with $30,000 would just stun people. So if I was going to target effort, some effort, I'd be thinking about extension grants. I told you all now. But no, but you know that. So, you know, if it's something, but it needs to be something that you actually need and want to do and you need funding for. So I'm talking about this as not so much research projects, though I would be the first person to say you should publish out of them because you do have a career to maintain and manage as you go along. But fundamentally, this is work that you need to do. It's not core business, so you've got to differentiate it. So how are you going to move that on? That's the way I come at it. The other cleverer people have different ways to come at it.
Thank you, Sally.
Excellent.
Very great words of wisdom and practical advice and experience from Sally, so thank you very, very much. It's now my pleasure to invite you to morning tea, and I've been asked to tell you that because we are running a little bit behind, you can come back at 11:15, which seems like 15 minutes now. Is that right? Till 11:15?
We've got some flexibility, but
some flexibility. That was it. They'll come back when they're ready. I think morning tea is just out there.